here we are now.
Once more. Or yet. Or still. It's always so good to have you back. It's like the family coming back together these days.
I know. Well, I felt last night at the California Hall. Like a gathering of the family.
Such a joyous occasion. It really, we've all grown over the years. As you mentioned last night, it's been so many years now.
Yeah.
I guess one of the first times in San Francisco was what, in '69? I guess there was some times that you had visited before that.
Speaking in San Francisco?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, no, as Ram Das.
Oh, it's Ram Das. Oh. Well, that had to be after '68. I don't know when that was. '69, I guess.
Over at Unitarian. He sort of reactivated me at that time.
That was nice at Unitarian Church.
Yeah,
I like that.
Beautiful.
I wish I could use that now. It's just not big enough.
It's a beautiful environment. Last night was so good, and I know Michael had some questions to expand on.
Hello, everybody, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm Ram Das, and Krishna Das is here, too. The Das brothers. Go ahead, Michael.
I had some questions.
I thought you had said that you wanted to expand on some of the things that were said last night.
Gee,
I know I did, since we've been doing a program with women tonight.
I thought it was interesting coming in the front door. There was a long line of people waiting to buy tickets, and there was a long line of people coming through the front door. And there was Ram Das standing there by the front door. And it was interesting to see people come through the front door and watch what was happening. Many people didn't notice that he was standing there, and some did. And it was just interesting to look at their faces as that happened.
The double takes were interesting.
Yeah. Guy outside asked me, he said, "Gee, you look familiar." He stood in line for a ticket. It's far out because I know, I bet I know 50-60% of that audience from other contexts, from one place or another through our lives. And it really is a chance to just have that moment of contact with each person. I really like that, being at the door. Because a personal contact with a human being is very different from these group processes, even though we do get very within our own heads together. I still really like to just have 1 second with each person.
It was interesting. Someone commented last night that the group seemed older. And I said, well, we're all getting older, but also straighter. Are we getting straighter, too?
I think we're getting less attached to external forms.
Images.
Of our separateness. And we're coming to a level now where the faith in the fact that something has truly happened to us is deep enough so that we don't need to prove it or show it or state it, And I don't feel any longer the need for all of my beads and Indian clothes, which I used to need, really. I used to need to make my statement.
If you remember the last time you were with us, Laura Huxley had just cut your hair.
My beard.
In the desert, I think.
My beard, not yeah.
She cut some of it.
Right.
Part of the transition.
There are always women everywhere ready to cut.
We've been doing a
You've
program.
Been doing a woman show,
yes.
And I should say that my 2 present teachers on the physical plane are both women, and that my path is actually the lineage that I pursue involves the love and honoring and opening to the universe as the mother, and it's very much a very intense feeding process, feeding from the mother, and it's opened me very much to that kind of energy, and it's And it's interesting because each being on their way to God becomes both the child that feeds from the mother and the bride of God, so that the soul has no maleness or femaleness, which is interesting because I'm now in a business where all the preoccupation with manness and womanness just isn't part of that anymore. It's just not.
It was interesting tonight to watch the program evolve. It was good to listen for a change, by the way. And
yeah, I found myself being just terribly nervous. It was a different experience, just like talking about being a fish out of water. It felt
being on
like
the other side of the glass for a change. No, but it evolved in a way that the fact that women were doing it was forgotten. We got down to details.
Yeah.
That we all share. That probably was the most rewarding.
It was a high-powered group of women, too.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Many of them, from days past.
Days past, yeah.
I wonder if you'd share something about your teachers with us. A great many people that are listening were there last night and probably have heard some of the information, but a great many other people were interested.
Well, without doing the whole story, since I did it in detail last night, and that tape I'm sure will appear somewhere around here sooner or later. The process of the kind of teachings that I'm involved in now are tantric in the sense that, in two senses. One, in the way in which daily life experiences are used as vehicles for purification. That is, rather than mantra or traditional chanting, things like that, it's the daily life interaction among the satsang and between the satsang and the teacher that is the grist for the mill. And often, for example, I might be seeing somebody who is needing help from me, and I'm in the middle of talking to them, and the phone will ring, it'll be the teacher. And the teacher will then keep me on the phone for 30, 40 minutes, and I have to deal with all of the social, psychological aspects of what it's like for that other person. And the teacher is perfectly aware of what's going on in the other person's consciousness and is seeing, would never allow me to be taught at the expense of the other person. So is very aware of the way that other person is working with their experiences as it's going along. But I'm working with my sort of frustration, irritation, because I was in the middle of doing something. But after all, here is the teaching. And I can't quite program when I get the teaching and in what packages I get it in. It's often just as I'm going to sleep at night, or just as I'd like to go to the bathroom, or something like that. And it goes on, and I have to deal with all of my conflicting motives all the time. And it's always done, the best teachings occur under tension, where, for example, now I'm in California and I'm being called by my teacher, Collect from New York, and she'll talk for an hour and a half, and I have to deal with my Jewish middle-class upbringing, which is very delicious to watch, because I know that if she had called at 2 minutes later, the rate would have been half as much. But how much is God worth? And what's a fair price? And it takes you through an incredible number of trips. This is beautiful. I mean, this is.
Well, I think the whole idea of teaching coming by telephone.
Oh, I think it's delicious. I have spent as much as sometimes 15 hours a day on the phone.
Oh, wow. And that's how it comes via telephone.
I'd say for me about a good 50% of it comes by phone. Yes. And the rest comes in person. And just the idea that I'm ending up living in Manhattan and going to see this very, very high being in a suburb of Manhattan for experiences that by every rule of the game that I know should be happening in caves in the Himalayas where you trek through the snowy, passes and are led there by old llamas and so on, and here we are.
You're not living in Manhattan just to keep your phone bill down.
No, I'm placed. I'm told where to live. And I am told what I eat, when I sleep, what clothes I wear, what time I'm to be everywhere. If I'm told to, if I leave the teacher's house at, say, 1 in the afternoon, and I'm to be home at 2:30, at 2:30, as I walk into the house, the phone will ring, and I'll start again. I mean, there's no space at all in the game, for me anyway, none whatsoever.
How about
and it's taken my ego on quite a few trips, as you can imagine, because I'm used to, after all, I have my own game going, if you will, that I've developed over the years of being Ram Dass, and I've got like 100 letters a week to answer, and lots of people want to see me, and I'm busy being somebody on some level or other, but that doesn't seem totally relevant in this game, and it's fun to be somebody in between being nobody and fit it all in together and really put the somebodyness into perspective by being a student primarily and seeing all of my somebodyness as part of my teaching. Excuse me.
Oh, hearing you talk last night about the telephone calls, and then hearing you again tonight about telephone calls, and I was what I got last night, an experience, and I was hearing you talk about your experience of like in the bathtub, when you're talking about being in the bathtub, and here comes the phone again.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this poor teacher who's calling you on the phone. How is she standing up to this?
She has 4 telephones and is keeping a few other people, as well as me, completely off guard all the time, out of control, and does it beautifully because she has consciousness, so she knows what each of us is doing at every moment. So she will always call just as I've gone to the refrigerator and opened it and have just the plan of what I'm about to eat, and I'm just reaching for it, the phone will ring. And that demands full attention, because if I pick up the phone and my consciousness isn't right there fully. See, it's a special telephone. Each of us has to have a special telephone just for her. And you pick it up, and if you're not conscious fully right there, within the first word, she'll hang up. That's the end of the teaching. You just blew the teaching. It's very tough. I mean, it's very exquisite essence, control, if you will. But that's because you're asking for the fire to be hot. You really want to get done. And when you want to ferret out and root out those little crevices of ego, they're very subtle, and it takes, because we all learn how to play like we don't have these things we want to hold on to.
I was still stuck back there with her being a housewife and having a family and 4 kids and a husband and all of that. And, I was just wondering how she must be an amazing individual to be carrying all of that on at one time.
It's quite unusual because her children have had to get used to finding her in samadhi and more or less understanding it. It's pretty much kept from her husband. There's kind of a protective veil around the whole situation. But in the hours when he comes home,
keep 4 telephones away from your husband.
Well, every now and then he gets irritated and he rips them all out of the wall. Otherwise, they're pretty good. But she has a little room of her own, which is her shrine room, and that's where she hangs out. The phones are all set up in there.
There's an element of absurdity about the whole thing.
The whole thing is a cosmic joke. But then, after all, Maharaji was this fat man in a blanket sitting on a wooden table, and in the history of spiritual teachers like a Gurdjieff or the Naropa, Tilopa, Marpa, that whole sequence, there was always that kind of cosmic humor. In the Zen tradition, there's the same thing with sadhaks. There's always been that kind of tongue-in-cheek quality about the teaching, which makes it less. But the minute you take it as a joke, it becomes deadly serious. And the minute you take it deadly serious, it becomes a joke. I mean, it's done to liberate you, after all, not to entrap you in this kind of heavy, less than high teachings are always kind of serious. We have important work to do. And the teachers all look like teachers.
Not like Very attractive housewives.
Because she, she'll drive down the street in her Cadillac Eldorado, and I think here comes the Divine Mother in her Eldorado. It's a hard one, for my consciousness to make.
No
Everything in my
sorries.
alternate culture. Why isn't she driving a Volkswagen?
The godmother.
The godmother, yeah.
Can you share any of her background, if it's relevant, of how she came to this place?
Yeah, I think that's public knowledge. She.
Maybe she'll call us tonight.
The number is 864-2051.
No, unfortunately, it's too late there. This is the time when she's deep in samadhi. But she's here. Don't worry about it. She was always a very pure being. I mean, all of her life, in a kind of a purity that is characteristic of, say, Billy Budd or James Dean in East of Eden. You know that quality of that kind of purity that it's innocence, a certain kind of innocence. And at the same moment, she was a very tough gal, very tough, was out selling. She married at 15. She was out selling fruit with her husband on the street, they had no money, and been a very independent woman all her life, very strong appetites, very powerful, a lot of Shakti. And part of her story was that she went to a dieting salon, and they told her about a breath she could use that would get her thin. It was called a yogi breath, and it was alternate breathing through her nostrils. And she went home and she got into her bathtub after her husband had gone to sleep. And because she did everything excessively, she did the breath for about 5.5 hours. And whether it was the first or second night, I don't know, but suddenly there was a man sitting on her toilet seat who, since she had no experience with any of this at all, she freaked completely and grabbed a towel and put it over herself and said, "Get the hell out of here, or I'll tell my husband." And of course, it was somebody her husband wouldn't see because she had just gone into another plane, and the being who had come turned out to be Swami Nityananda, who was a very, very great saint in India, who was the guru of Swami Muktananda, who is here now. And
might add, a very heavy gentleman.
Huh?
A very heavy
A
gentleman.
very, very heavy gentleman, yes. Heavy in many ways. And Nityananda started to bring her to realization. And then he sent her to a woman in New York City who's a very, very high spiritual teacher by the name of Hilda Charlton. And Hilda just touched her, and that's when she went into her deep samadhi for the first time. And she knew nothing about any of this. She had no
background
training.
at all.
No, nothing. She loved Christ. She knew that. And she was... And a number of times in her life, I think she'd had experiences where people had felt a religious experience from being near her. And immediately after that, she started to be sort of deluged with priests who really wanted to spend time with her and who were beginning to experience visions of Christ and the presence of Christ through her. And then things would happen, like she would go to a bar mitzvah, because she's Jewish, and she'd go to a bar mitzvah, and the rabbis would be drawn to her, and she would open the Torah and lecture to them about the scrolls, from the scrolls. And she would, people started calling her from Israel and from India, and scholars started to ask her questions because she could go into these planes of consciousness where all the stuff was available to her. And she played for a long time, and then she began to, as her consciousness kept, her awareness kept growing, she started to limit her work to those beings who really wanted to go to God. And the curiosity kind of people and all started to fall away. She didn't feed that as much. And but she's extraordinary teacher. Yeah.
She doesn't prescribe.
It's not a
any-
public teaching, so it's not available to people. So, and very well protected
Except by
us.
telephone.
Yeah. Not even by that.
She doesn't prescribe any particular method as a discipline.
Well, the method is really it's a very universal teaching in a certain kind of a way, in the sense that all of the great masters are honored and teachings come through from all of them, from Christ and from Buddha and from Ramakrishna and Shirdi Sai Baba and Ramana Maharshi and Nityananda and my Guru Neem Karoli Baba and others like that. I'd say our work is a great deal with the awakening of Shakti or energy through pranayam, through breath, the learning to have great discipline in terms of working with energies in the chakras, the opening of the heart and the relation to the universe as the mother and the feeding from the mother through the heart, the mostly, rather than the quieting of the mind, more like contemplative kind of meditations, rather than more not vipassana or one-pointedness, much more contemplative kind of meditation. Study of things like the Gospel of Ramakrishna, things like that. I'd call it devotional tantra, is the way I would define the thing. Is that what Krishna does? Is that also?
Tremendous emphasis on purity.
Yeah.
Of mind.
Yeah. And having to get all your scenes straight and be very clean in your game playing. Clean of body also, by the way. I mean, bath and breath and everything has to be very much together. And you have to learn how to sit for long periods of time, very straight. And it's very definitely out of the yogic tradition. We are all brahmachari. We're all vegetarian. We don't participate in hardly any other social activities. I mean, the ones of us that are really going the trip are really going the trip. I mean, I live in New York City, and it's absurd. In a year, I may have been to one movie. I don't even think that. I haven't looked at television. I don't listen to radio. I don't even read the New York Times anymore. About once a week, I check up to find out whether the world ended. Other than that, I don't even live in that reality at all. I drive through the streets, but it's like it's like a surrealistic scene for me, you know. I could be living anywhere in the universe at this moment. I could be living in India. This is exactly the same life I would be leading if I were going to the temple every day in India, to be with Maharaji. And Maharaji is very much present and teaches a great deal in that scene.
You mentioned other people. How many people are actually going through this?
Actually, a very few, because of the limitations of her lifestyle. It's all got to be done sort of very quietly and just in a little room in her basement. So it really is a very few people.
She's not into getting a call director.
To getting what?
A call director.
No.
10-button phone.
Yeah, I understand.
And last night, when you first brought her up, I noticed a hush fell over the audience and something of a gasp. Suddenly you were in a different place. Again, you'd shifted.
Yeah.
And you'd pulled the rug out from under people again. And one of the things you said is, don't do anything because I do it. And I found that very significant because I've watched the spiritual community follow many of the courses that you've taken in a very apparently superficial way. Although I hesitate to make that judgment. I mean, there are physical things that are identifiable. Maybe that's a better way of putting it.
No, I think what you're saying, Will, is very true. I think a lot of people have taken on Ram Dass as somewhat of guru and look to Ram Dass as kind of their spiritual.
I think more be here now than me, in actuality. that Be Here Now served a function at a certain point. I mean, numerous people come up to me and say, that's my Bible, or I've been reading it for years, or I look at it like the I Ching, I check it out for things to do. And I think that that book, which I don't identify as my book, it's merely something that came through us at a certain point in time, is what is the thing that they've looked to. I think, because I haven't felt the pressure of people demanding I be a guru. I mean, I treat it very lightly when they do, but I haven't. I'm just getting to the point now where I'm considering myself a teacher now, which is even new. That's another new place, actually, a new space.
In putting forth the teachings that you're receiving, transmitting those?
Exactly. So I'm taking on a very few students now, too, which is a whole new experience for me, because I've been giving the introductory lecture for so many years now. You're always giving that first lecture. You never give the second one. And after a while, I began to realize I knew more than I could ever tell anybody, and it was getting frustrating. So I started slowly to, let a few people gather and start to get an advanced group together, and that's really exciting for me.
Are you teaching a method, or are you gearing it to the individual? Because that always seemed to be your particular teaching, was that different strokes for different folks.
Well, that is the teaching of the Be Here Now period. Yeah. Now I would say that in general, about 50% of the time I'm working with the students is the game of cleaning them up, is forcing stuff out and cleaning it up, the sort of discrimination, cleaning up the game. And the other 50% of the time is bringing them closer into spiritual spaces through energy, through heart, through meditation, through study. So it's a game of bringing them up and then getting the earth up behind them. So they keep bringing their plane of life up to the planes of consciousness they meet. And constantly, for example, you take a group of people in a meditation up and you say, you do breathing, and you're going up higher and higher, and you're getting into higher spaces and clearer spaces. And then as you take people up, then you start to say, okay, Will, what do you got now? And you're in a place where the last thing you want to do is have to talk. Right. You just want to space out. But that talking is very critical, because it helps people know how they got there, so they end up with the control of it, rather than it being something they got from you.
Is this the contemplation that you're talking about? I'm not aware.
Yeah, you give them a directive meditation,